The 12 apostles, chosen by Jesus Christ, hold a significant place in Christianity. But did you ever wonder how these key figures in the Bible lived, and more importantly, how they died? The death of the 12 apostles is a mystery many overlook, yet their martyrdom shapes the very foundation of the Christian faith. Knowing how the apostles of Jesus died adds depth to our understanding of their sacrifice and legacy. So, how did Peter die? Or what about John the Apostle? The Bible gives us glimpses, and historical accounts fill in the gaps, making it all the more important to explore. Peter's crucifixion upside down, or the death of Andrew on an X-shaped cross, isn't just historical. It's symbolic of their commitment. The martyrdom of the apostles is a testament to their dedication to spreading the gospel, no matter the cost. These deaths weren't accidents or tragedies, but powerful acts of faith. How did the disciples die? And what can we learn from their ultimate sacrifice? Their stories remain inspirational even today. The apostles' deaths highlight how committed they were to spreading Jesus' teachings. Many of them died brutal deaths, like James the Greater, who was beheaded by Herod. And let's not forget the mystery surrounding the deaths of others like Philip and Thomas, whose lives and deaths are wrapped in fascinating layers of history. Apostle deaths explained show us how their sacrifice didn't end with their physical departure, but left a lasting spiritual impact. So, why does this matter today? The legacy of the apostles still resonates. Their sacrifice not only helped shape the early Christian church, but also continues to inspire believers around the world. The way they lived and died encourages us to ask ourselves, how strong is our faith, and what are we willing to endure for what we believe in? These accounts of how the apostles died serve as reminders that their lives weren't just about teaching, they were about living their faith even in the face of death. Now, let's move deeper into the life and death of one of the most well-known apostles, Peter. What made his death so significant that it continues to be a symbol of humility and devotion? Peter, one of Jesus' closest apostles, holds a special place in Christian history. But did you know how Peter died? His crucifixion upside down in Rome is one of the most well-known acts of martyrdom in Christianity. Peter didn't feel worthy to die the same way Jesus did, so he requested to be crucified upside down. This act of humility speaks volumes about Peter's devotion and character. How did Peter's death shape the early Christian community? It inspired believers to stay steadfast even when facing persecution. Crucifixion itself was a brutal way to die. Yet, Peter's death wasn't about the pain. It was about his unwavering faith. He believed in Jesus' message so deeply that he was willing to endure unimaginable suffering. This isn't just a story about how Peter died. It's about how his death became a symbol of humility and sacrifice. His request to be crucified upside down shows the deep reverence he had for Jesus. The death of Peter, like the deaths of the apostles, offers a vivid example of how the apostles' sacrifice impacted the world. Peter's legacy continues to resonate today. He was known for his leadership in the early church and played a pivotal role in spreading Christianity. His martyrdom solidified his place not just as an apostle, but as a cornerstone of the Christian faith. When we think about martyrdom in Christianity, Peter's name is often the first to come to mind. His death shows that faith isn't just about belief, it's about living that belief, even in the most difficult circumstances. So, why does Peter's crucifixion upside down still matter today? For one, it teaches us the importance of humility. Peter, despite being one of Jesus' closest followers, didn't see himself as equal to Christ. His death encourages us to reflect on how we carry our own faith. Are we willing to be humble? Are we ready to make sacrifices for what we believe in? As we move from Peter's story, we'll next explore the death of another apostle, Andrew. His story is equally powerful and shows how the apostles' deaths were far more than historical footnotes. They were profound, faith-driven acts that still speak to us today. Andrew, the brother of Peter, is another apostle whose death speaks volumes about his unwavering commitment to spreading the gospel. His martyrdom is one of the most iconic in Christian history. According to tradition, Andrew was crucified on an X-shaped cross in Greece, a symbol that still resonates with believers today. But why an X-shaped cross? Andrew, like his brother Peter, didn't consider himself worthy to die in the same manner as Jesus, so he requested this unique form of crucifixion. The way Andrew died offers a glimpse into the humility that defined the apostles' sacrifice. What makes Andrew's death so significant isn't just the manner of his execution, but the life he lived leading up to it. Andrew traveled far and wide, spreading the message of Christ, even to places that were hostile to the gospel. How did Andrew die? His crucifixion wasn't just an end to his life, it was the ultimate testimony of his dedication. The martyrdom of Andrew, like the other apostles, is a vivid reminder that faith isn't just a belief, it's a way of life, and sometimes a way of death. Andrew's death on the X-shaped cross, now known as St. Andrew's Cross, is remembered today as a powerful symbol of humility and faith. His missionary work across different regions, including Greece and Asia Minor, helped establish early Christian communities. How did the disciples die? Their deaths, including Andrew's, weren't just tragic, they were transformative, showing how committed the apostles were to fulfilling their divine calling. Andrew's legacy lives on through the cross that bears his name and the communities he helped build. One of the most striking aspects of Andrew's death is how he responded to his martyrdom. It's said that he faced his death with courage and joy, continuing to preach the gospel even while hanging on the cross. Andrew's willingness to endure suffering for the sake of Christ's message continues to inspire believers today. His story, like those of the other apostles, teaches us that true faith requires not only dedication, but also the courage to stand firm in the face of adversity. Now that we've explored Andrew's story, let's move on to the next apostle, James the Greater. His death was equally impactful and holds a special place as he was the first apostle to be martyred. James the Greater, one of the sons of Zebedee and brother to John, holds the distinction of being the first apostle to be martyred. His death came at the hands of King Herod Agrippa I, who had James beheaded in Jerusalem. This brutal execution marked the beginning of widespread persecution of Christians, making James's death a pivotal moment for the early church. His beheading wasn't just an isolated event, it was part of Herod's plan to suppress the growing Christian movement. So, how did the apostles die? James's death stands out for both its timing and impact on the early believers. Being the first apostle to die for his faith, James's martyrdom sent shockwaves through the Christian community. His death, detailed in the Acts of the Apostles, shows that following Jesus wasn't just about spreading the gospel, but about facing life-threatening opposition. James, like the other apostles, faced these challenges head-on, knowing that martyrdom was a real possibility. How did James the Greater die? His beheading by Herod highlighted the very real dangers that awaited the apostles as they carried out their mission. James the Greater's martyrdom is significant, not just because he was the first to die, but because of the courage he displayed. He was part of Jesus' inner circle, alongside Peter and John, witnessing key events like the Transfiguration. Despite this privileged position, James met a violent end, demonstrating that no one was immune to persecution. The martyrdom of the apostles, starting with James, shows how committed they were to spreading Jesus' message, no matter the personal cost. James's beheading also marked the start of intensified persecution in Jerusalem. Following his execution, many Christians fled the city, spreading the gospel even further. So, while Herod intended to crush the movement, James's death only fueled the spread of Christianity. The apostles in the Bible knew that martyrdom was likely, yet they persisted in their mission. James's death shows us the power of faith and the strength that comes from standing firm in one's beliefs. As we move from James's story, we turn to his brother John, who, unlike the others, wasn't martyred. His story takes a different turn, offering another perspective on how the apostles' lives ended. Let's dive into how John's life unfolded and what made his death unique. John, often referred to as the beloved apostle, stands out as the only one among the 12 apostles who didn't suffer martyrdom. While most of the apostles met violent ends, John lived to an old age, spending his final years in exile on the island of Patmos. His survival wasn't without hardship as he faced persecution, but unlike his fellow apostles, he wasn't martyred. How did John the Apostle die? He passed away naturally, marking a significant contrast to the deaths of the apostles. John's life was unique in many ways. As part of Jesus' inner circle, he witnessed pivotal moments like the crucifixion and the transfiguration. His exile to Patmos, where he wrote the book of Revelation, further set him apart from the rest. Even though John didn't face martyrdom, his contributions to Christianity were profound. His death, though peaceful, holds great significance in understanding the broader picture of the apostles' sacrifice and their unwavering faith. John's longevity allowed him to contribute much to the early Christian church. He authored several key New Testament books, including the Gospel of John, 3 epistles, and Revelation. His writings not only provide deep theological insight, but also show the personal experiences he had with Jesus. While John may not have suffered the same physical martyrdom as the others, his exile and perseverance through persecution speak volumes. His story adds another layer to the mystery of how the apostles of Jesus died. John's death teaches us an important lesson about endurance and faithfulness. Despite living a longer life than the other apostles, he faced many trials. Yet, through it all, he remained dedicated to spreading the gospel. His survival also allowed him to mentor the next generation of Christian leaders, ensuring that the message of Christ continued to spread. How did the disciples die? John's story reminds us that death doesn't always come in the form of martyrdom, but faithfulness to the end is the true mark of a disciple. Now, as we leave behind John's peaceful death, we turn to another apostle whose story takes a more violent turn. Next, we'll explore the life and martyrdom of Thomas, famously known as Doubting Thomas. His journey took him far from Jerusalem, and his death left a lasting legacy in a distant land. Thomas, often known as Doubting Thomas, is remembered for initially questioning Jesus' resurrection. However, his life after that moment showed anything but doubt. Thomas embarked on a bold missionary journey to India, where he dedicated his life to spreading the gospel. How did Thomas die? His commitment led to his martyrdom, where he was speared to death for his faith. This apostle's death highlights the courage it took to preach the message of Jesus in unfamiliar and hostile lands. Thomas traveled far beyond the familiar regions of the Roman Empire, reaching as far as South India. His mission was groundbreaking, and even today, many Christian communities in India trace their roots back to Thomas's evangelism. The death of Thomas wasn't merely the end of his life, but the beginning of a lasting legacy in a region far from Jerusalem. The story of how the apostles died often involves both physical journeys and spiritual sacrifice, and Thomas's death in India is a prime example of both. What's especially significant about Thomas's death is how his journey exemplifies the apostles' willingness to take the gospel to the ends of the earth. His martyrdom is one of the many that shows how the deaths of the apostles weren't just isolated events, they were global milestones. How did Thomas die? He was speared by those opposed to his message, but his sacrifice opened the door for Christianity to take root in India. His story is a reminder of the far-reaching impact the apostles had, even in regions they had never previously visited. Thomas's death is not just a story of martyrdom, but of transformation. The man who doubted became one of the boldest apostles, traveling far to ensure that others would hear the good news. His life is a testament to the power of faith, and his death reflects the price that the apostles of Jesus paid to spread Christianity. The martyrdom of the apostles was not only about how they died, but how they lived their lives in service to Christ. Next, we'll turn our attention to Philip, whose crucifixion upside down shows once again how the apostles met their ends in ways that would shape the future of Christianity. His story adds another layer to understanding how these men's deaths were not just sacrifices, but building blocks for the early church. Philip, one of the earliest followers of Jesus, is another apostle whose death mirrors the sacrifice and dedication of the 12. Philip was crucified upside down in the city of Hierapolis, located in Asia Minor. His death shares similarities with Peter's, but what sets Philip apart is how he continued to preach the gospel even in his final moments. How did Philip die? He faced crucifixion head-on, ensuring that his message reached people even as his life was ending. The death of Philip is a clear example of the apostolic devotion to spreading Christianity, no matter the cost. Philip's missionary work took him to distant regions where he spread the gospel in areas hostile to Christianity. His evangelism led to his arrest and subsequent crucifixion. Yet even while facing death, Philip used the moment to preach to his executioners. His unwavering faith in Jesus left a deep impression on those who witnessed his death. The story of how the apostles died, especially in cases like Philip's, shows that their faith wasn't just about teaching, it was about living and dying for the gospel. What makes Philip's death significant is not only the manner in which he died, but the context of his crucifixion. His martyrdom took place in Hierapolis, a city known for its religious and cultural diversity. By being martyred there, Philip made a profound statement about the power of faith in a pluralistic society. The martyrdom of the apostles like Philip highlights how they were willing to confront the political and religious powers of the time, all while staying true to their mission. Even after Philip's death, the seeds of Christianity that he planted continued to grow in Asia Minor. His legacy didn't end with his crucifixion. It continued through the communities he helped establish. The death of Philip, like many of the apostles' deaths, served as a catalyst for the growth of the early Christian church. How did the disciples die? They died with faith on their lips, and Philip's story reminds us of the strength that comes from preaching until the end. As we leave Philip's story, we'll now move on to Bartholomew, whose martyrdom stands out as one of the most brutal. His flaying and beheading in Armenia highlight the extreme lengths to which the apostles went to share the gospel, even in the face of unimaginable cruelty. Bartholomew's death is perhaps one of the most gruesome among the 12 apostles. Known for his evangelism and dedication to spreading the gospel, Bartholomew traveled extensively, including missions to India and Armenia. How did Bartholomew die? According to tradition, he was flayed alive and then beheaded for his unwavering faith. His brutal martyrdom highlights the extent of the apostles' sacrifice, demonstrating the horrific opposition they faced while spreading the message of Christ. Bartholomew's death occurred in Armenia, where he was targeted by those who rejected his teachings. The method of his execution, being flayed alive, reflects the hostility towards Christianity in regions where paganism was deeply entrenched. This violent death did not, however, silence the message he carried. Bartholomew's unwavering faith, even in the face of torture, became a symbol of resilience for the early Christian church. His death reminds us of how the apostles of Jesus died, not for personal glory, but to bring the gospel to places where it had never been heard. Despite the brutal nature of his death, Bartholomew's legacy continued to thrive in the regions he evangelized. His martyrdom in Armenia, a land far from Jerusalem, symbolizes the global reach of the apostles' work. Bartholomew's story is a reminder that the apostles' deaths were not isolated incidents. They were part of a larger mission to spread the message of Christ far and wide. How did the apostles die? Many, like Bartholomew, faced the most extreme forms of persecution, yet their commitment to their faith never wavered. Bartholomew's flaying and beheading are not just tragic events, they are moments of deep significance for the Christian faith. His story encourages believers to reflect on the price paid by those who first spread the gospel. The martyrdom of the apostles, particularly Bartholomew, shows us the lengths they were willing to go to fulfill their mission. The deaths of the apostles often reveal how their strength of character and faith transformed entire regions, even in the most hostile environments. As we conclude Bartholomew's story, we'll next turn to Matthew. While not as brutal as Bartholomew's martyrdom, Matthew's death in Ethiopia is another chapter in the long history of how the apostles died while spreading the gospel. Matthew, the former tax collector turned apostle Shiu, is remembered for his gospel, which provided one of the earliest accounts of Jesus' life and teachings. But what about his death? How did Matthew die? According to tradition, Matthew was martyred in Ethiopia while spreading the gospel, though the exact method of his death remains a mystery. Some sources suggest he was stabbed to death, while others hint at a stoning. Regardless, Matthew's martyrdom is a reflection of his deep commitment to his faith, transforming from a tax collector despised by his people to a revered apostle. Matthew's mission in Ethiopia highlights his passion for reaching new audiences with the message of Christ. Ethiopia, a land rich in ancient culture, became one of the many regions where the apostles sought to plant the seeds of Christianity. Matthew's martyrdom there demonstrates the apostles' willingness to venture into uncharted territories, often at great personal risk. The death of Matthew shows that the apostles didn't just focus on familiar regions, but reached out to places that were less hospitable to the gospel. What's truly remarkable about Matthew's death is how it symbolizes redemption. As a former tax collector, Matthew was once considered a sinner by his peers, but his transformation into an apostle showcases the power of Christ's message. How did the disciples die? Many of them, including Matthew, met their end far from home, but their deaths helped solidify Christianity in regions where it had never been heard before. The martyrdom of Matthew reminds us that it's never too late to change, and his death reflects the power of true transformation through faith. Matthew's gospel continues to impact believers around the world, but his death in Ethiopia offers an even deeper perspective on his role in the early Christian church. His martyrdom wasn't just an end, it was the fulfillment of a life radically changed by Christ. Matthew's death shows how the apostles of Jesus laid down their lives so that others might come to know the truth. The legacy of the apostles, including Matthew, is one of sacrifice, faith, and redemption. As we leave Matthew's story, we turn next to James the Lesser, whose martyrdom in Jerusalem stands as another example of how the apostles' deaths were integral to the growth of early Christianity. James the Lesser, often overshadowed by other apostles, played a crucial role in leading the early Christian church in Jerusalem. His life and death remind us that even those who worked quietly behind the scenes left a profound impact on Christianity. How did James the Lesser die? According to tradition, he was stoned and then clubbed to death by the religious leaders in Jerusalem. His death, like the deaths of the other apostles, reflects the intense opposition to the gospel in its early days. The martyrdom of James the Lesser stands as a testimony to his leadership and faithfulness. As the leader of the Jerusalem church, James the Lesser faced intense pressure from Jewish authorities who saw the rise of Christianity as a threat. His preaching and leadership brought many converts to the faith, which led to his persecution. The way he died, being stoned and then clubbed, shows how brutal the opposition was. The death of James the Lesser also highlights how the apostles of Jesus were not just spreading the gospel, they were building the foundations of the church, often at the cost of their own lives. James the Lesser's death is significant for another reason. He was deeply connected to the Jewish community in Jerusalem. His martyrdom by stoning, a traditional form of execution for blasphemers, shows that his message of Jesus as the Messiah was deeply controversial. How did the disciples die? For James, his death reflected the growing tension between the early Christians and the Jewish authorities. His leadership in Jerusalem made him a target, but his death only further solidified the resolve of the early church. Despite being stoned and clubbed, James the Lesser's faith never wavered. His death demonstrated to early Christians that following Christ wasn't just about spreading the message, it was about living out that message in the face of persecution. The legacy of the apostles, including James the Lesser, is built on their courage and steadfast belief in the gospel. How the apostles died, particularly in James's case, continues to inspire believers today to stand firm in their faith, no matter the opposition. Now, as we leave behind the story of James the Lesser, we turn to Simon the Zealot, another apostle whose death is shrouded in mystery and tradition. His martyrdom, whether by crucifixion or being sawn in half, is yet another chapter in the apostles' unwavering dedication to their mission. Simon the Zealot, often considered one of the more mysterious apostles, is remembered for his passionate zeal and dedication to spreading the gospel. But how did Simon the Zealot die? Tradition offers two possible accounts. One stating that he was crucified, while another suggests that he was sawn in half. Regardless of the method, Simon's death is a testament to his commitment to his faith and his willingness to face brutal persecution in order to spread the message of Christ. Simon's life before becoming an apostle is marked by his association with the Zealots, a group that sought to overthrow Roman rule. His transformation into a follower of Christ is significant, showing how deeply Jesus' teachings resonated with those from different walks of life. Simon's missionary work took him far, possibly reaching regions in Persia, where many believe his martyrdom took place. The death of Simon the Zealot, whether by crucifixion or being sawn in half, reflects the intense opposition the apostles faced as they ventured into foreign lands. The exact method of Simon's death remains a mystery, but the accounts of his martyrdom share one common theme. He died for his faith. Simon's zeal for the gospel never wavered, even in the face of such brutal persecution. The deaths of the apostles often followed similar patterns, violent, unjust, but deeply meaningful. How the apostles died shows the intensity of their commitment and the far-reaching impact of their work. Simon's death, like the others, left behind a legacy of faith that continues to inspire believers today. Simon's passion for his mission didn't end with his martyrdom. The communities he helped establish, along with the seeds of faith he planted, continued to grow after his death. His martyrdom served as a reminder that faith isn't just about living for something. It's about being willing to die for it. The martyrdom of the apostles, especially Simon's, demonstrates the extreme lengths to which they were willing to go for the sake of the gospel. As we move on from Simon's story, we turn to Thaddeus, also known as Jude, whose death by clubbing reflects yet another example of the brutality faced by the apostles. His contributions to the early Christian church remain significant, and his martyrdom is another chapter in this remarkable story. Thaddeus, also known as Jude, is one of the lesser-known apostles, yet his contributions to the spread of Christianity were just as significant. How did Thaddeus die? According to tradition, Thaddeus was martyred by being clubbed to death while on a missionary journey. His death, though brutal, reflects the dangerous environments the apostles ventured into to spread the gospel. Thaddeus's martyrdom is another reminder of how the apostles of Jesus gave everything for their faith, including their lives. Thaddeus's missionary work took him to regions such as Mesopotamia, where he preached the gospel to people who had never heard of Jesus. His teachings led to conversions, but also to hostility from local authorities. The death of Thaddeus, like many of the apostles, came at the hands of those who opposed his message. Yet despite the dangers, he continued to preach, knowing that his mission was far greater than the risks he faced. How did the disciples die? Thaddeus's story shows that, for many, death was an inevitable consequence of spreading the gospel. What makes Thaddeus's martyrdom particularly significant is his connection to the early Christian writings. The Epistle of Jude, which is attributed to him, provides insight into the early church and the challenges it faced. His contributions to the New Testament offer believers a deeper understanding of faith and perseverance. The martyrdom of Thaddeus shows that his life wasn't just about teaching, it was about living out the message of Christ, even in the face of death. Thaddeus's death by clubbing reflects the brutal reality of the apostles' work. They weren't just teachers or preachers, they were missionaries in hostile lands, facing opposition at every turn. The death of Thaddeus, like the deaths of the apostles before him, serves as a reminder of the price they paid to spread the message of Jesus. His legacy continues to inspire believers to remain steadfast in their faith, no matter the challenges they face. As we leave behind Thaddeus's story, we now turn to one of the most infamous figures in the Bible, Judas Iscariot. His story is different from the others, as his death wasn't one of martyrdom, but one of betrayal and regret. Let's explore how Judas's actions and his tragic end left an indelible mark on Christian history. Judas Iscariot is perhaps the most infamous of the 12 apostles, not for his teachings or missionary work, but for his betrayal of Jesus. How did Judas die? According to the Bible, after betraying Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, Judas was filled with guilt and took his own life by hanging. His death stands in stark contrast to the martyrdom of the other apostles, as it was a result of remorse rather than persecution. Judas's betrayal remains one of the most discussed events in Christian history, raising questions about forgiveness, regret, and redemption. Judas's decision to betray Jesus wasn't a spontaneous act. It was a calculated move driven by greed, as many believe. However, the aftermath of his betrayal reveals a man consumed by guilt. The story of Judas's death shows the heavy burden of betraying not just a teacher, but the Messiah. His regret became too much to bear, leading him to take his own life. How did the apostles die? While most were martyred for their faith, Judas's death stands as a tragic reminder of the consequences of betrayal and the weight of guilt. Judas's story is particularly poignant because it forces us to grapple with the complexities of human nature. How did Judas, an apostle who walked with Jesus, fall so far? His death is a sobering reminder that even those closest to Jesus are not immune to temptation. While Judas's actions ultimately led to the fulfillment of prophecy, his death remains one of the most haunting in biblical history. The death of Judas Iscariot, unlike the deaths of the apostles who were martyred, is often seen as a cautionary tale rather than a heroic end. The legacy of Judas Iscariot is one of regret and missed redemption. Many believe that if Judas had sought forgiveness, his story could have ended differently. His death by suicide illustrates the despair that comes from turning away from grace. How the apostles died varies greatly, but Judas's death holds a unique place in the narrative as it speaks to the depth of human despair when one feels they are beyond forgiveness. His story leaves us with much to ponder about the choices we make and their lasting consequences. As we close the chapter on Judas's tragic end, we turn back to the other apostles whose sacrifices, though painful, laid the foundation for the Christian church. Now, we'll reflect on the legacy of the apostles and the enduring impact of their martyrdom on Christianity. The legacy of the apostles is one that goes far beyond their teachings and missionary work. Their deaths, often brutal and unjust, became powerful symbols of unwavering faith and dedication to spreading the gospel. The martyrdom of the apostles wasn't just about how they died, but what their deaths meant for the early Christian church. Their sacrifices laid the foundation for Christianity, inspiring generations of believers to remain steadfast, even in the face of persecution. The legacy of the apostles continues to influence the faith of millions worldwide. How the apostles died holds deep significance, as each death serves as a testimony of faith in action. From Peter's crucifixion upside down to Thomas's spearing in India, the apostles' deaths are more than just historical facts. They are reminders of the cost of discipleship. These apostles of Jesus didn't just preach the gospel, they lived it, even to the point of death. Their martyrdom is a testament to their belief in the truth of Jesus' message, a belief so strong that they were willing to give their lives for it. The impact of their deaths on the early Christian church cannot be overstated. The apostles' willingness to die for their faith strengthened the resolve of early Christians, showing that the gospel was worth any sacrifice. How did the apostles die? They died with the knowledge that their deaths would not be in vain. The martyrdom of the apostles became a rallying cry for the early church, motivating others to spread the message of Jesus, even in the most hostile environments. Their deaths weren't just about the end of their lives, they were about the continuation of the mission. What's fascinating is how the legacy of the apostles continues to inspire modern-day believers. Their stories are retold in churches, reminding people of the power of faith and the strength that comes from following Christ. The deaths of the apostles resonate with those who face persecution for their faith today, showing that the path of discipleship is not without challenges, but is ultimately rewarding. The apostles' sacrifice teaches us that faith is not just about what we believe, it's about how we live, and for them, how they died. As we reflect on the legacy of the apostles, it's clear that their martyrdom wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a movement that would change the world. Their lives and deaths are intertwined with the birth of the church, making their sacrifices all the more meaningful. Now, we'll move into a final reflection on the mystery and significance of their deaths, and what we can learn from their extraordinary journey of faith. The deaths of the apostles remain one of the most compelling mysteries in Christian history. How did the apostles die, and why do their deaths carry such deep meaning? From Peter's crucifixion upside down to John's peaceful passing, the apostles' deaths reflect the ultimate sacrifice of faith. Their martyrdom wasn't just about ending their lives, it was about planting the seeds of a global movement that would carry on for millennia. Each death, whether brutal or peaceful, teaches us profound lessons about courage, faith, and perseverance. What makes the martyrdom of the apostles so significant is the message behind it. The apostles of Jesus didn't just follow his teachings, they lived and died by them. Their deaths symbolize the highest form of dedication to the gospel, reminding us that true faith isn't just about comfort and prosperity, but about enduring hardships for something greater. How did the disciples die? Their deaths offer a roadmap for believers today, showing that even in the face of suffering, faith can thrive and grow. The mystery surrounding the deaths of the apostles also invites us to reflect on our own faith journeys. What would we be willing to sacrifice for what we believe in? The apostles' deaths challenge us to evaluate the depth of our commitment to our faith. Their martyrdom wasn't in vain. It was the cornerstone on which the early church was built. And even now, the legacy of the apostles continues to inspire and strengthen Christians worldwide, encouraging them to live out their faith with the same courage and conviction. Each death holds a unique story, but together they tell a unified tale of unwavering devotion. Whether it was through brutal execution or peaceful passing, the apostles' deaths contributed to the spread of Christianity in ways that are still felt today. The significance of their martyrdom stretches beyond their time, reminding us of the lasting impact that a life lived for Christ can have. The apostles' sacrifice is a testament to the power of faith and the unbreakable bond between belief and action. As we conclude this journey through the lives and deaths of the apostles, we are left with one final reflection. Their deaths were not the end of their story, but the beginning of something far greater. The legacy of the apostles invites each of us to live boldly, to embrace our faith fully, and to recognize that, like them, we are part of a larger story, one that continues to unfold with each new generation of believers. If you found these stories inspiring and want to keep uncovering Bible mysteries like this, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss out on future content and continue learning more about the depth of Christian faith.